There's a moment in every manipulative relationship where the puppet realizes the strings. But Marcus Chen discovered something far more powerful than breaking free. He learned that the most devastating response to control isn't rebellion. It's complete indifference. What happened next would turn a toxic power dynamic on its head and teach him that sometimes caring less is the ultimate power move. This is the true story of how one man's calculated emotional withdrawal didn't just free him. It shattered the carefully constructed empire of someone who had controlled dozens of lives for years. Marcus Chen sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, staring at the email that had just landed in his inbox. The subject line read, "We need to talk, now." The sender was Victoria Ashford, his business partner of 7 years and the woman who had systematically turned their once promising tech startup into her personal kingdom. His hands trembled slightly as he hovered over the delete button, but he didn't press it. Not yet. That would come later. The morning had started like any other in the past 3 years. Marcus arrived at the office at 6:30, a full 2 hours before Victoria, to get work done in peace. The company, NextGen Analytics, had been his brainchild, a revolutionary data analysis platform that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. He had built the initial algorithm in his garage, working 16-hour days while his wife Sarah supported them both on her teacher's salary. When he brought Victoria on board as co-founder, she had been charming, brilliant, and apparently aligned with his vision. She had the business connections he lacked, the social polish he had never quite mastered. It seemed like the perfect partnership. That was 7 years ago. The Marcus Chen of today barely recognized the optimistic engineer who had signed those partnership papers. The man in the mirror had dark circles under his eyes, had gained 30 pounds from stress eating, and flinched whenever his phone buzzed. Sarah had left him 18 months ago, unable to watch him deteriorate further. "You've become a ghost," she had said on her way out. "You're so busy managing Victoria's moods that you've forgotten who you are." She wasn't wrong. Victoria had perfected the art of control through 1,000 tiny cuts. She had a gift for making Marcus question his own judgment, his own worth, his own reality. In meetings, she would dismiss his ideas with a subtle eye roll, only to present the same concept a week later as her own brilliant insight. She controlled the narrative with investors, positioning herself as the visionary while relegating Marcus to technical support. She had slowly, methodically isolated him from other executives, spreading quiet doubts about his stability, his commitment. The worst part wasn't the professional marginalization. It was the emotional manipulation. Victoria had an uncanny ability to sense weakness and exploit it. When Marcus's father died 2 years ago, she had been sympathetic for exactly 48 hours before using his grief as a weapon. "I know you're going through a lot," she would say in meetings, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe you should sit this one out. We don't want you making decisions when you're not at your best." She had mastered the art of the public compliment that contained a private barb. "Marcus is so detail-oriented," she would tell clients. "The implication clear. He couldn't see the big picture. He's incredibly loyal," she would say to the board, suggesting he lacked ambition or drive. Marcus had tried everything. He had confronted her directly, only to be met with tears and accusations that he was being aggressive and hostile. He had documented her behavior, keeping detailed records of every manipulation, but she was too clever to leave obvious evidence. He had gone to the board, but Victoria had already cultivated relationships with each member, and they saw her as the face of the company's success. He had tried to leave, but his shares were tied up in a vesting schedule that Victoria had insisted on, a schedule that coincidentally gave her more control with each passing year. He was trapped in a golden cage of his own making. The breaking point came 3 months ago at a company retreat in Aspen. Victoria had organized the event, ostensibly to rebuild team unity after a difficult quarter. What followed was 3 days of calculated psychological warfare. She had arranged the seating at dinner to isolate Marcus from allies. She had scheduled team-building exercises designed to highlight his social awkwardness. The final evening, during a company presentation, she had unveiled a new strategic direction that effectively removed Marcus from all decision-making authority. As she clicked through slides that reorganized the company's power structure, Marcus felt something inside him crack. Not break, that would come later, but crack, like the first fracture in a dam before it collapses. He returned to Denver in a daze. For 3 days, he barely moved from his couch. He didn't answer Victoria's increasingly urgent calls and emails. He didn't go to the office. He simply sat in the dim light of his apartment, the one Sarah had decorated before she left, surrounded by the remnants of a life he no longer recognized. On the third day, his younger sister Emma came by after he failed to respond to her messages. She took one look at him and said, "You look like hell." What happened? Marcus told her everything. The years of manipulation, the constant undermining, the feeling of being slowly erased from his own company. Emma listened quietly, then asked a simple question that would change everything. "Why do you still care what she thinks?" The question stopped Marcus cold. Why did he care? Every interaction with Victoria was a battle for validation, for recognition, for proof that he mattered. He realized with sudden, crushing clarity that his emotional investment in her opinion had become the very chain that bound him. Victoria's power didn't come from her position or her connections. It came from his desperate need for her approval, his fear of her displeasure, his constant vigilance about her moods. He had given her the keys to his emotional state, and she had used them to imprison him. Emma pulled out her phone and opened a podcast. "Listen to this," she said. "A friend sent it to me when she was dealing with a narcissistic boss. It's about power dynamics and psychological manipulation." The podcast was hosted by Dr. Vorengel, Rachel Martinez, a psychologist who specialized in toxic relationships. For the next 2 hours, Marcus listened as Dr. Watson. Martinez described patterns he recognized intimately. But it was her proposed solution that made him sit up straight. The manipulator's greatest fear, Dr. Martinez explained, isn't anger or rebellion. It's indifference. Their power exists in your reaction. They need you to care about their opinion, their approval, their disapproval. The moment you genuinely stop caring, their influence evaporates. I call it the Machiavelli principle in reverse. Machiavelli taught princes how to control through calculated emotion. The antidote is calculated emotional detachment, not fake detachment. That's still engagement. Real, genuine indifference to their manipulation. Martinez went on to describe what she called the ghost method, a systematic approach to psychological withdrawal. The key, she emphasized, was authenticity. You couldn't pretend not to care while still being emotionally invested. You had to actually detach to see the manipulator as irrelevant to your well-being. It's like playing chess with someone, she said, and then realizing you don't have to play at all. You can just stand up and walk away, not in anger, not in defiance, but because the game no longer interests you. Marcus listened to the podcast 3 more times that night. Each time, he felt something shifting inside him. A decision was forming, not in his conscious mind, but somewhere deeper. By the time dawn broke over Denver's skyline, he had made a choice. He would not fight Victoria. He would not confront her or argue with her or try to win against her. He would simply stop caring about the game entirely. The next morning, he went to the office. Victoria was waiting in his doorway before he even sat down. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I've been calling you for 3 days. We have the investor meeting tomorrow and you completely ghosted me. This is completely unprofessional." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she was already assessing which emotional button to push. In the past, this moment would have sent him into a spiral of anxiety and justification. He would have apologized, explained, tried to repair the damage to their partnership, but something fundamental had changed. He felt nothing, not anger, not resentment, not even satisfaction at her frustration. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness. "I needed some time off," he said simply. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "I'm back now." Victoria's eyes narrowed. She had expected defensiveness or apology. His mild response clearly threw her off balance. "Time off? Marcus, you can't just disappear. I need to know I can count on you. The board is concerned about your commitment. The board can schedule a meeting if they have concerns," Marcus interrupted gently. "I'll address them directly." This was new territory. Marcus never interrupted Victoria. He never contradicted her narratives. He saw confusion flicker across her face before she regrouped. "Look, I understand you've been stressed," she said, switching to her concerned voice, "but this behavior is concerning. People are worried about you. I'm worried about you. In the past, this would have worked. Marcus would have felt guilty for causing worry, for being a burden, for not living up to expectations. But now, listening to her words, he recognized them for what they were. tools, carefully selected weapons designed to trigger specific emotional responses. The recognition brought a strange sense of clarity. He wasn't angry at Victoria for using these tools. A hammer isn't evil for being a hammer. He simply no longer wanted to be a nail. "I appreciate your concern," he said. And he meant it in the most literal sense. He appreciated that she was showing him exactly what he needed to detach from. "I have work to do." "Was there something specific you needed?" Victoria stood in his doorway for a long moment, visibly trying to process this new dynamic. Finally, she said, "The investor meeting tomorrow. 2:00. Don't be late." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Marcus turned to his computer and opened his calendar. He saw the investor meeting, noted it, and then did something he had never done before. He went back to work without spending the next 2 hours analyzing the conversation, replaying it in his mind, worrying about what Victoria thought or what he should have said differently. He simply moved on. It felt strange, like a phantom limb he kept expecting to hurt but didn't. The investor meeting the next day would be the first real test. Marcus prepared his materials, but he didn't obsess over them. He didn't try to anticipate Victoria's moves or prepare defensive strategies. He simply prepared his work and let it speak for itself. When he walked into the conference room, Victoria was already there with the 3 investors, laughing at something one of them had said. She glanced at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between annoyance and uncertainty. The meeting began, and Victoria launched into her presentation. Marcus listened politely, making notes. When she reached the section about the new strategic direction, the one that diminished his role, she paused dramatically. "Marcus, did you want to add anything about the technical implementation?" It was a trap, Marcus realized. A setup. She expected him to either stumble through an unprepared explanation or to challenge her narrative, making him look difficult or confrontational in front of investors. In the past, he would have done one or the other. "Now," he simply said, "the technical approach is solid. I've documented everything in the materials I sent you all yesterday. Happy to answer specific questions if you have them." One of the investors, James Rothwell, spoke up. "Actually, Marcus, I did have a question about the scalability projections. Victoria mentioned you'd identified some potential bottlenecks?" "I did. The current architecture can handle approximately 3 million transactions per second. Beyond that, we'd need to implement a distributed processing system. I've outlined 3 potential approaches in the document, with cost-benefit analyses for each. My recommendation is the hybrid model, which gives us the most flexibility." Rothwell leaned forward, interested. "That's not what Victoria mentioned. She said you were concerned the platform couldn't scale at all." Marcus felt Victoria's eyes on him. This was the moment she expected him to either back down or create conflict. He did neither. "I think there may have been a miscommunication," he said easily. "The platform scales well. We just need to plan for infrastructure investments as we grow. It's a good problem to have. It means we're succeeding." The meeting continued, but Marcus noticed a shift in dynamics. The investors asked him more questions. They referred to his documentation. Victoria tried several times to redirect the conversation, but her usual tactics, the subtle dismissals, the reframing of his ideas as problems, seemed less effective. Marcus wasn't defensive, so there was nothing to deflect. He wasn't seeking validation, so her approval or disapproval landed on deaf ears. He was simply present, professional, and fundamentally unengaged in the emotional subtext that had always defined their interactions. After the meeting, Victoria cornered him in the hallway. "What was that?" she hissed. "You completely undermined me in there." Marcus looked at her with genuine curiosity. "How so?" "I answered their technical questions. You contradicted what I said about the scalability concerns." "I clarified a miscommunication," Marcus said mildly. "Was the information I provided incorrect?" Victoria's face flushed. "That's not the point. We're supposed to present a unified front. You're making me look bad." And there it was, the core of Victoria's game. She needed him to be smaller so she could appear larger. She needed him anxious so she could be the calm one. She needed him seeking approval so she could grant or withhold it. Marcus felt something close to pity. Not for her. She had made her choices. But for the years he had spent believing this dynamic was normal, necessary, or somehow his fault. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I'm not trying to make you look any particular way. I'm just doing my job. If that's a problem, we should probably discuss it with the board. Marcus never suggested involving the board. He never pushed back. Are you threatening me? No, Marcus said, and he meant it. I'm just saying that if you're unhappy with my work or my conduct, there's a formal process for addressing it. I'm happy to engage with that process. He paused. I have another meeting. Have a good afternoon, Victoria. He walked away, physically walked away, while she was still sputtering. It felt surreal, like breaking a law of physics he had thought was fundamental. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Marcus realized that something essential had shifted. He wasn't fighting Victoria anymore. He wasn't trying to win or prove anything. He had simply stepped out of the arena entirely, and in doing so, he had discovered something Victoria's entire empire was built to prevent him from knowing. Her power had always been an illusion, sustained only by his belief in it. The ghost method, Marcus was beginning to understand, wasn't about being invisible. It was about being irrelevant to someone else's emotional games. And in that irrelevance, he was finally starting to find himself again. The weeks following the investor meeting brought a strange new rhythm to Marcus's life. He continued going to work, attending meetings, and completing his responsibilities with quiet efficiency. But the invisible cord that had once bound him to Victoria's every mood and manipulation had been severed. The change was subtle enough that most people didn't notice immediately, but Victoria felt it like a wound. She tried everything in her arsenal to re-establish control. She scheduled last-minute meetings designed to disrupt his schedule, then acted hurt when he declined if he had conflicts. He would simply say, I have another commitment then. Let me know some alternative times. She would send urgent late-night emails demanding immediate responses, testing whether she could still create that familiar anxiety. Marcus began turning off his phone after 7 p.m. When she confronted him about it, he said mildly, I've found I'm more productive with clear boundaries between work and personal time. If there's a genuine emergency, you can reach me through the answering service. The phrase genuine emergency hung in the air between them. They both knew that most of Victoria's urgent matters were manufactured crises designed to keep Marcus in a perpetual state of reactivity. By naming this dynamic without accusation, Marcus had exposed it to the light. Victoria's face had gone pale. I see, she said tightly. I didn't realize my leadership style was such a burden to you. In the past, Marcus would have immediately backtracked, apologized, reassured her that he hadn't meant it that way. Now he just nodded thoughtfully. It's not about burden, it's about sustainability. I want to do my best work, and that requires rest. I'm sure you understand. He smiled pleasantly and returned to his work, leaving Victoria standing in his doorway, visibly struggling to process this new version of their relationship. The real earthquake came during a Monday morning executive team meeting. NextGen had grown to 40 employees, with 5 executives reporting to the co-founders. These meetings had become Victoria's stage, 2 hours every week where she held court, made pronouncements and subtly reinforced the hierarchy with Marcus at the bottom. She had perfected the art of the public critique disguised as collaborative feedback. I think Marcus has some concerns about this approach, she would say, her tone making it clear these concerns were probably baseless. Marcus, why don't you walk us through your hesitations? The implied message was always the same. Marcus was the obstacle, the naysayer, the one who needed convincing. This particular Monday, Victoria opened the meeting with an announcement. I've been thinking about our organizational structure, she began, pulling up a slide. As we scale, I think we need clearer role definitions. I'd like to propose that I take the CEO title formally, with Marcus as our CTO. This reflects the reality of how we've been operating and will give investors clarity about our leadership structure. The room went quiet. Everyone knew this was more than a title change. It was a formal declaration of the power dynamic that Victoria had been building for years. Marcus would be officially demoted from co-founder to a technical employee. He would report to her. His equity stake wouldn't change, but his voice would. The other executives glanced at Marcus, waiting for his reaction. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. He felt their eyes on him, felt Victoria's barely concealed triumph. In the old dynamic, this would have devastated him. It was the culmination of years of marginalization, the final coup in Victoria's slow-motion takeover. He would have argued, or worse, accepted it with visible defeat. Either response would have fed Victoria's power. Instead, Marcus nodded slowly. That's an interesting proposal. I'd like to review it with legal counsel before we make it official. There are some equity and governance implications we should understand fully. Victoria blinked. Legal counsel? Marcus, this is just clarifying our roles. If it's just clarification, then having legal review it should be straightforward, Marcus said reasonably. I want to make sure we're doing this correctly. It's due diligence. Are you saying you don't trust me? Victoria's voice had an edge now. Marcus looked at her with genuine puzzlement. Why would you interpret due diligence as a trust issue? We review all major decisions with legal. This is a major structural change. It seems prudent. He turned to the rest of the team. Does anyone else have concerns about the proposal? I think we should all have time to consider the implications. Jennifer Park, the CFO, spoke up hesitantly. I do think there's merit in discussing this more thoroughly. Title changes can affect everything from bank signature authority to insurance to investor relations. Maybe we should table this for now and come back with a more complete proposal. Marcus saw Victoria's jaw tighten. Jennifer had been one of her most reliable allies, someone who rarely questioned her direction. But Marcus's calm, reasonable approach had created space for others to voice concerns without seeming like they were choosing sides. Victoria couldn't attack Jennifer for raising practical considerations without looking unreasonable herself. Fine, Victoria said sharply. We'll revisit this later. Let's move on to the product roadmap. The meeting continued, but something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time, Victoria's pronouncement had been questioned and deferred. More importantly, it had been questioned not through emotional confrontation, but through simple, logical procedure. Marcus hadn't fought her. He had simply refused to accept her framework for the decision. And in doing so, he had shown the other executives that Victoria's authority was not as absolute as it appeared. After the meeting, Marcus returned to his office and found an email from David Torres, one of the senior engineers who had been with the company since the early days. The subject line read, "Coffee?" They met that afternoon at a cafe 2 blocks from the office. David got straight to the point. "That was brave this morning," he said. "The title thing. I've been watching what's been happening.